The little black girl reached the biker near the metro entrance as someone watched her from the ticket booth. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. It was just another ordinary day at the metro station. The afternoon sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the entrance. The buzz of people coming and going filled the air, but there was one person who didn't belong. A little black girl, no older than 10, was darting between the crowd, her face streaked with tears, her breathing ragged as though she had been running for a while. She looked out of place among the hurried commuters, her small frame barely visible in the sea of people. Her eyes scanned the area, wild with panic, as if she was searching for someone or something. Her gaze finally landed on him. Near the entrance to the metro, a biker stood by his bike, looking like a rock in the middle of a storm. The massive Harley-Davidson was parked beside the entrance, its chrome gleaming under the fading sunlight. The man, dressed in a leather jacket with patches that read Thunderwolves MC, didn't seem to notice her at first. But the girl's desperate eyes locked onto him, and without thinking, she sprinted towards him, tears streaming down her face as she gasped for breath. Please, please help me, she cried, clutching his leather vest with her tiny hands. The biker, taken by surprise, looked down at her. His rugged face softened for a moment as he saw the fear in her eyes. What happened, kid? He asked, his deep voice filled with concern. The girl shook her head, looking over her shoulder, her small body trembling. They took my brother, she whispered, her voice barely audible. The biker's heart clenched. He looked around quickly, his instincts kicking in. Something wasn't right. The girl's clothes were torn, her hair messy, and there was a look of panic on her face that he couldn't ignore. Where are they? He asked, trying to keep his tone calm. The girl pointed toward a black car speeding down the street, its windows tinted. The silver car, she said, still shaking. They're taking him. The biker's gaze hardened. He knew the dangers of this city, and he had seen too many cases like this before. He didn't hesitate. Stay here, he told her. I'll be right back. But before he could move, a man emerged from the crowd, watching them both from a distance. His eyes locked onto the biker, and the biker could feel the tension in the air. The man wasn't moving yet, but the way he stood, the way he watched the girl, told the biker everything he needed to know. The man wasn't just a bystander. He was part of something bigger. And the girl? She was in grave danger. The biker's hand went to his phone. His club was spread across the city, and he knew just who to call. This wasn't just going to be a quick rescue. He could already feel the weight of the situation sinking in. As the man in the distance took a step forward, the biker quickly texted his brothers. The cavalry was on the way, and they weren't going to let anyone harm this little girl. The chase had just begun. The biker's phone buzzed in his pocket, and he didn't hesitate. His fingers flew over the screen as he quickly typed a message to his brothers. We've got a situation. Little girl in trouble. Need backup. Metro entrance. Move fast. The second the message was sent, he turned back to the girl, still trembling, her wide eyes locked on him. Stay close, he said softly. We're going to get your brother back. The girl nodded, but her fear was palpable. She kept glancing over her shoulder, as though the man who had been watching them might appear at any moment. The biker didn't wait. He moved quickly, scanning the crowd. His instincts told him that every second counted. He stepped into the street, waving for a nearby taxi. When it screeched to a stop in front of him, the biker yanked open the door, signaling for the girl to get in. Get in, quick, he urged, his voice firm. The girl hesitated for a split second, then obeyed, jumping in. The biker slammed the door shut and immediately turned to the driver. Go. Follow that car. He pointed in the direction the silver SUV had gone. The taxi driver didn't ask questions. He hit the gas, and the car lurched forward, weaving through traffic as they tried to keep the SUV in sight. In the back of the taxi, the girl was still shaking, her breath coming in quick bursts. She turned to the biker, her voice barely a whisper. Please, don't let them take him. I won't. The biker promised, his voice low but determined. We're going to get him back. You're safe now. As the taxi sped through the city streets, The biker's mind raced. He didn't know who these people were, but he had an idea. The silver SUV was moving too fast, and it wasn't the kind of vehicle you'd expect a typical family to drive. There was something off about the whole situation, and it made his blood run cold. He couldn't afford to waste any more time. He pulled his phone from his jacket and dialed a number. His heart pounded as it rang. Forge, the voice on the other end answered after a few rings. It's me. I've got a girl here, a little black girl, and her brother's been taken. The car's heading east. I need you and the crew to meet me at the intersection of Broadway and 12th. There was a pause before Forge spoke again. We're on our way. We'll be there in 15. The biker hung up, staring out of the taxi window, his mind still turning over the situation. The girl beside him was quiet now, but her body was tense with fear. The biker could feel the weight of it pressing down on him, making his resolve even stronger. He had promised her father, Tyrone, that he would protect her. That promise was all he had left now. As they approached the intersection, the SUV came into view again, just as the biker had predicted. The silver car was waiting at a red light, and it seemed like they had a perfect window to move in. Keep going, the biker told the driver, his voice urgent. The taxi driver pressed on the gas and swerved around a truck, cutting off a few cars as they sped toward the waiting SUV. The silver car had no idea what was about to happen. The biker could see the figure of the man behind the wheel, his face obscured by the tinted windows, but there was no mistaking the way the car was moving. It was controlled, deliberate, like someone who knew exactly where they were going. But the biker wasn't going to let that happen. Not on his watch. As the gap closed between the taxi and the SUV, the biker's phone buzzed again. It was a message from Forge. We're here. Ready to move. The biker knew this was it. The moment of truth. They were close enough now, and the SUV hadn't spotted them yet. He motioned to the driver to slow down, then quietly slipped out of the taxi, pulling his helmet on as he moved. He was quick, silent, moving with the precision of someone who had been in high-stakes situations before. The girl followed him closely, her hand clutching his sleeve as they crept up behind the SUV. The streets around them were eerily quiet, the only sounds coming from the hum of the city and the distant roar of motorcycles approaching. The biker's heart raced as he took a deep breath and nodded to the girl. Stay behind me. I won't let anyone hurt you. They were now only a few feet away from the SUV. The man in the car hadn't noticed them yet. The biker could feel his muscles tense, his instincts on high alert. He needed to move fast, and he needed to be smart. The doors of the SUV opened, and the biker's heart skipped a beat. This was it. The moment he had been waiting for. The man who had been following them stepped out of the car, his face unreadable. The biker could feel the tension thick in the air as the man's eyes scanned the street, his gaze finally landing on the biker. There was a moment of silence, a brief pause as the two men locked eyes. The biker knew what was coming next. The man wasn't going to let them walk away without a fight, and neither was he. With one quick motion, the biker pulled the girl behind him, ready for whatever was about to happen. The battle for her brother's safety was about to begin. The biker's eyes locked onto the man, now standing in front of the silver SUV. The tension in the air was thick, like the calm before a storm. The girl, still clutching his sleeve, was shaking but stayed close behind him, her wide eyes never leaving the man. The biker could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him, but he knew there was no turning back. They were here to protect her, and they weren't going to let her down. The man's eyes flickered briefly toward the girl, then back at the biker. There was something cold and calculating in his stare, like he was trying to decide whether or not this was worth the fight. Without a word, the man reached into the SUV, his hand visible through the open window as he grabbed something. The biker's heart raced, his instincts screaming that this wasn't just a simple confrontation. The man pulled out a gun. The biker's mind went into overdrive. He knew the situation had just escalated. But there was no fear in his chest, just a deep, burning anger that grew stronger by the second. He had seen too much violence in his life to let someone threaten a kid, and he wasn't about to let it happen now. Get down, he shouted at the girl, shoving her behind the nearest parked car. He wasn't taking any chances. The girl's small body hit the ground behind the car with a soft thud, and the biker crouched low, eyes never leaving the man. He could feel his brothers getting closer. He could hear their bikes in the distance, their engines roaring like thunder. This was it. The man's finger twitched on the trigger, and the biker dove to the side, just as the first shot rang out. The bullet whizzed past him, slamming into the metal of the car beside him. The biker rolled to the ground, his hand reaching for the gun holstered at his waist. This wasn't how he wanted this to go down, but the man had just made it personal. The biker came up on one knee, his gun now in hand. He didn't want to shoot, but he would if he had to. He aimed at the man's arm, pulling the trigger. The shot rang out, hitting the man's wrist. The gun fell from his hand, clattering to the ground as the man howled in pain. For a split second, the street fell silent, the sounds of the city muted by the intensity of the moment. The man staggered backward, clutching his bleeding wrist, but his eyes never left the biker. "You don't know who you're messing with," the man growled through gritted teeth. "I'm just trying to get my daughter back." The biker stood slowly, his gun still aimed at the man. "She's not your daughter," he said, his voice low and calm. "She's a little girl, and she's not going anywhere with you." The man's face twisted in rage. "You don't understand," he spat. "She belongs to me. She's mine." The biker's grip on his gun tightened. He didn't want to hear this man's twisted version of reality. "I don't care who you think she belongs to," he said. "She's not going anywhere with you. Not while I'm here." The sound of approaching motorcycles broke the tension. The biker didn't look away from the man, but he could feel the presence of his brothers now, their bikes pulling up behind him. One by one, they dismounted, each one taking up a position around the scene. The man's eyes darted around, seeing the bikers now surrounding him. He knew he was outnumbered, but his pride and desperation wouldn't let him back down. "You think this is over?" the man sneered. "You think a bunch of bikers are going to stop me?" The biker took a step forward, his voice steady. "You've got one chance to walk away. Leave now, or we're going to make sure you never hurt anyone again." The man's eyes flicked to the motorcycles, then back to the biker. He took a deep breath, as if weighing his options. For a moment, there was silence, the tension thick enough to choke on. Finally, the man sneered one last time, muttered something under his breath, and turned, limping back to the SUV. The bikers watched him go, but their eyes never left him until the car disappeared into the distance. The biker holstered his gun, but his stance remained alert. He turned to the girl, who had cautiously peeked around the corner of the car. "It's okay," he said gently. "You're safe now." The girl stood slowly, her eyes still wide with fear, but there was a glimmer of relief in them now. The biker knelt down to her level. "What's your name?" he asked softly. "Maya," she whispered, her voice barely above a whisper. The biker smiled, his heart aching for this little girl who had been through so much. "Maya," he said, "we're going to make sure nothing like this ever happens again." As his brothers gathered around him, the biker felt a sense of peace settle over him. They had done it. The girl was safe. And now, they were ready to take the next step. Find out who this man was and why he thought he had the right to hurt her. It wasn't over yet, but for the first time in a long time, the biker knew they were on the right path. The biker stood there for a moment, watching the silver SUV disappear down the street. His body was tense, his mind racing with questions. Who was that man? And why was he so determined to take Maya? The answers seemed to be just out of reach, like pieces of a puzzle scattered across the city. He turned to Maya, who was still standing by the car, her small body visibly shaking but her eyes filled with a spark of hope. "Are you okay?" he asked softly, kneeling down in front of her. She nodded slowly, wiping away the last of her tears. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "I know, kid," the biker said, his heart aching for her. "But you're safe now. We'll make sure nothing happens to you." Maya looked up at him, her eyes still wide with fear, but there was a hint of trust in them now. "Who was that man?" she asked, her voice trembling. The biker paused. He didn't have all the answers yet, but he knew one thing for sure. Maya had been through something no child should ever face. "I don't know," he said honestly, standing up and looking at his brothers. "But we're going to find out." As the group gathered around him, the biker made a quick decision. He pulled out his phone and dialed the number of his lawyer, a trusted ally who had helped them through many situations like this before. "Hey, it's Forge," the biker said when the call connected. "I need you to look up a name for me. I don't have a lot to go on yet, but I've got a guy. Last name Donovan. He's a cop, but I think he's involved in something bigger." Maya's stepdad. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Got it," Forge replied. "I'll get to work." "You're saying he's the one who took her?" The biker's jaw tightened. "Yeah, And he's not just any cop. There's something about him. Something off. I'll dig into it, Forge said, his voice filled with determination. Give me everything you can. I'll let you know what I find. The biker hung up and looked at Maya, his mind already working on their next move. He knew they couldn't just sit here. Not after what had happened. They had to get answers, and they had to get them fast. All right, here's what we're going to do, he said, turning to his crew. We're going to make sure Maya is safe, and we're going to get to the bottom of this. Nobody leaves until we know everything. His brothers nodded, their expressions serious. They were ready for whatever came next. The biker turned back to Maya, his eyes softening. I'm not going to let anything happen to you, he said, his voice calm but firm. We'll take care of you. You're part of the family now. Maya looked up at him, her face a mix of relief and gratitude. She didn't say anything, but she didn't need to. The look in her eyes said it all. As the group prepared to leave, the biker's mind continued to race. The more he thought about it, the more certain he became that this wasn't just a random act. There was something bigger at play, something that went beyond Maya's stepfather. But for now, his priority was clear. Maya needed protection, and he wasn't going to stop until she was safe. They rode out, their engines roaring to life, a symphony of power and determination. The wind whipped past them as they sped down the road, each rider in perfect formation. As they made their way toward the next step in their investigation, the biker couldn't help but think of Maya's father, Tyrone. He had promised him years ago that he would protect his daughter, and he was going to keep that promise, no matter what. The ride was long, the night growing darker around them, but there was no turning back now. They were on the hunt for answers, and they wouldn't stop until they had them. The biker and his crew roared down the highway, the sound of their engines thundering. In the night air, the city lights flickered in the distance as they made their way to the location Forge had tracked down for them. Maya, sitting in the back of one of the motorcycles, held on tight, her small hands gripping the biker's jacket. Her eyes were wide, still processing everything that had happened, but there was a faint sense of security in her now. The man who had taken her brother was no longer a threat, at least for now. But the biker knew they still had a long way to go before Maya would truly be safe. As they pulled into the parking lot of an old warehouse just outside the city, the biker felt his heart rate pick up. Forge's information had led them here, but the place looked abandoned, the windows boarded up, and the parking lot was eerily empty. It was exactly the kind of place where shady deals went down. They had to be careful. Stay close, Maya, the biker said, turning to her. We don't know who or what we're dealing with yet. Just keep your head down, okay? Maya nodded, her eyes still wide with fear. The biker gave a reassuring smile, but deep down, he was uneasy. He had seen enough to know that people like the man who had been chasing them weren't afraid to hurt anyone to get what they wanted. The biker and his crew dismounted, the sound of their boots hitting the pavement echoing in the stillness of the night. They gathered around, their faces hardening as they prepared to enter the warehouse. The plan was simple. Get in, get out, and find out who was behind this. Forge had managed to dig up some crucial information. Officer Donovan, Maya's stepfather, was tied to a local gang, and there were whispers that he had connections to some serious criminals. It all made sense now. Maya's stepfather wasn't just a cop. He was using his position to cover up his involvement in something far worse. We go in, stick to the plan, the biker said, his voice steady but filled with authority. We find out who's behind this, and we get Maya's brother back. No more messing around. His crew nodded in agreement. They had all been through hell together, and they knew what was at stake. This wasn't just about loyalty anymore. This was about protecting the innocent. As they made their way toward the entrance of the warehouse, the biker's mind was already running through the possible scenarios. What would they find inside? Was it just a group of criminals using the warehouse as a base of operations, or was there something more sinister at play? As they reached the door, the biker signaled for the group to halt. He carefully tested the door handle, and to his surprise, it was unlocked. He exchanged a look with his brothers, then pushed the door open slowly, the heavy creak of the hinges echoing in the quiet night. Inside, the warehouse was dimly lit, the faint glow of a single overhead light casting long shadows across the room. The air smelled of stale wood and rust, the silence hanging like a thick fog. The biker motioned for his crew to spread out, their eyes scanning the room for any signs of movement. Stay sharp, he whispered, his voice low. They all moved with precision, each of them taking a different position to cover the area. The tension was palpable as they crept through the warehouse, their footsteps muffled by the thick layer of dust on the floor. Then, out of the corner of his eye, the biker spotted something, a flicker of movement in the far corner of the warehouse. He motioned for the others to follow, and they silently moved toward the shadowy figure. As they got closer, the figure became clearer. It was a man, hunched over a table, his back to them. He was scribbling something on a piece of paper, but the biker could see the telltale signs of tension in his posture. This was no ordinary person. The man turned around suddenly, and the biker's heart stopped. It was Officer Donovan, Maya's stepfather. He stared at them for a moment, his eyes widening in shock as he recognized who was standing in front of him. "What are you doing here?" Donovan asked, his voice cold and angry. "This is none of your business." The biker stepped forward, his voice firm. "You're right about one thing. It's none of our business. But the moment you decided to take a kid and hurt her family, you made it our business." Donovan's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, the biker thought he saw a flicker of fear. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "You have no idea what you're messing with," Donovan spat. "You don't know who I'm working for. You're all just pawns in a game you can't even begin to understand." The biker stepped closer, his jaw clenched. "We don't need to understand your game," he said. "We just need to make sure you're stopped. And that starts right now." Donovan took a step back, his eyes flicking to the side, as though looking for an escape. But it was too late. The biker's brothers were already in position, blocking the exits and surrounding the room. The game was over. "You're done," the biker said. "It's over." Donovan's face twisted in rage, but he knew the fight was lost. The biker stepped forward, ready to take action, but just as he did, a loud crash came from the back of the warehouse. The sound of glass shattering echoed through the room, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps running toward them. The biker's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't over yet. The sound of shattering glass still echoed through the warehouse, the sharp cracks splitting the tension in the air. The biker's instincts kicked in immediately. He turned quickly, his hand already on the grip of his gun, ready to react to any threat. His brothers were alert, their eyes scanning the shadows. But there was something different in the air now, something more dangerous. The footsteps grew louder, fast-paced and heavy, and the biker could feel his heart pounding in his chest. He glanced at Donovan, whose face was pale, his eyes darting around nervously. "What's happening?" the biker demanded. Donovan's lips twisted into a tight smirk, his expression hardening. "You're too late," he sneered. "You have no idea what you're up against." The biker didn't have time to argue. The footsteps were too close now, and the air was thick with the promise of violence. He signaled for his brothers to spread out, positioning themselves to cover every possible escape route. As the sound of the footsteps grew louder, the biker tensed, ready for whatever came through the shadows. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw movement, shadows darting across the wall. The figure stepped into the dim light, and the biker's stomach dropped. It was a man, but this one was different. He was wearing tactical gear, his face covered with a black mask, and he carried a rifle slung across his chest. The biker's mind raced. Who was this guy? Was he connected to Donovan? And what was his role in all of this? The man moved forward confidently, his eyes scanning the room, clearly unfazed by the biker's crew. He wasn't here for small talk. "You're in the wrong place," the biker said, his voice steady but filled with authority. The man stopped, his gaze locking with the biker's. For a moment, the room was completely still, the only sound the faint hum of the warehouse's old lights. "No," the man replied, his voice cold and emotionless. "You're the ones in the wrong place." Without warning, he raised his rifle, aiming it directly at the biker. Time seemed to slow down. The biker's hand twitched toward his own weapon, but he didn't draw it just yet. He needed to be smart. The man's eyes never left him, his grip on the rifle steady. "This is your last warning," the man said, his tone flat. "Step aside. Now." The biker's brothers had already positioned themselves around the man, but none of them moved, knowing that any sudden movement could trigger a firefight. The situation was tense, and every second felt like an eternity. "You don't scare me," the biker said, his voice low but firm. "And neither do your friends." The man's eyes narrowed, but he didn't flinch. The silence stretched between them, heavy with the threat of violence. Then, as if on cue, The back door of the warehouse slammed open, and the biker's brothers burst through, their boots thundering on the concrete floor. The man shifted slightly, turning his attention toward the new threat, but the biker saw his chance. With a quick motion, he pulled his gun, aiming it straight at the man. "Drop it," he ordered, his voice commanding. The man hesitated for a fraction of a second, but it was enough. In one fluid motion, the biker moved forward, tackling the man to the ground with all his weight. The rifle skidded across the floor as the two men struggled, but the biker's grip was firm. He twisted the man's arm behind his back, forcing him to the ground. "Get him cuffed," the biker barked to his crew. His brothers rushed forward, quickly securing the man's wrists with zip ties. The biker stood up, breathing heavily, his eyes scanning the room. He turned to Donovan, who had been standing in stunned silence, his face twisted in anger and disbelief. "You thought you could just walk away from this?" the biker asked, his voice cold. Donovan didn't answer immediately. He was still processing the fact that his hired muscle had been taken down so easily. Finally, he spoke, his voice filled with venom. "You have no idea what you've just done," he hissed. "You think you've won? You've just made things worse for everyone." The biker wasn't intimidated. He stepped closer to Donovan, his eyes hardening. "I don't care what you think," he said. "You've hurt a lot of people, and we're not going to let you get away with it. Not anymore." The tension in the room was palpable, but the biker knew they were getting closer to the truth. They had the man who had been pulling the strings. Now it was time to make him talk. The biker turned to his crew, nodding at one of his brothers. "Take him to the van," he ordered. "We're not done yet." As they dragged Donovan out of the warehouse, the biker's mind was already racing, thinking about what he had learned tonight. Maya's stepfather wasn't just a cop. He was a part of something bigger, something darker. And now, they had the first piece of the puzzle. The biker couldn't help but wonder how deep this went. Who else was involved? And what would it take to stop them once and for all? As the van doors slammed shut and the sound of engines roared to life once more, the biker knew this was just the beginning. The real fight was about to begin, and he was ready for whatever came next. The van rumbled down the empty highway, the headlights cutting through the darkness as they sped toward their safe house. The biker sat at the front, his eyes locked on the road, but his mind was elsewhere. Donovan, the man who had been pulling the strings, was in the back of the van, tied up and glaring at them. The biker's hands tightened on the wheel. He could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. They had caught one piece of the puzzle, but there was so much more to uncover. They still didn't know who was truly behind this, or how far the corruption went. What he did know was that they had to get answers. They couldn't afford to let anyone slip through their fingers. The girl, Maya, sat in the back of the van with one of the bikers. Her small frame was curled up against the side of the van, and her eyes were distant, still processing everything that had happened. The biker glanced back for a moment, his heart heavy. Maya had been through so much, more than any child should ever have to endure. He'd promised her father that he would protect her, and he intended to keep that promise. The van jolted as it hit a bump in the road, snapping the biker out of his thoughts. He focused on the road ahead, keeping his eyes peeled for any signs of trouble. They weren't out of danger yet. They still had to figure out what Donovan knew, and more importantly, what he wasn't saying. As they neared the safe house, the biker's phone buzzed. It was a message from Forge. "We've got something. I'll explain when you get here." The biker's pulse quickened. They had finally made a breakthrough. He glanced over at one of his brothers, who was sitting in the passenger seat. "We need to move fast," he said. "Forge has something. Get ready for anything." The brother nodded, his hand resting on the door handle, ready to jump into action. The safe house was just ahead, a nondescript building on the outskirts of town. It wasn't much, just a place to lay low, to regroup, and to get answers. The biker pulled into the driveway, his eyes scanning the surroundings. The last thing they needed was to be ambushed while they were trying to figure things out. As the van came to a stop, the biker's mind raced. He knew they couldn't stay here long. They had to find the real mastermind behind this operation before it was too late. The door of the van opened, and the bikers quickly moved to secure the area. The biker stepped out and made his way to the back of the van, where Donovan was still tied up, struggling against the restraints. "You're not going anywhere," the biker said, his voice cold. Donovan glared up at him, but there was something else in his eyes now, fear. Fear of what was coming. "You think you've won?" Donovan spat. "You think you've got it all figured out?" You're just pawns in a game you don't even understand. The biker stepped forward, his hand resting on the handle of his gun. I don't care about your game, he said. I care about getting to the truth. And you're going to tell us what we need to know. Donovan didn't say anything for a moment, his eyes flicking around as if trying to find a way out. But the biker knew there was no escape. They had him cornered. What's the deal with Maya's stepfather? The biker asked, his voice low and menacing. Donovan's face twisted with anger. You don't know what you're dealing with, he sneered. You think I'm the one you should be after? You have no idea who you're up against. The biker took a step closer, his gaze unwavering. You're going to talk, he said. And if you don't, we'll make sure you wish you did. The tension in the air was thick. Donovan's breathing was ragged, but he didn't speak. The biker could see the wheels turning in his head. He knew there was something Donovan wasn't telling them, and he wasn't going to stop until he got the truth. Just then, a car pulled up behind them. The biker's crew immediately went on alert, their eyes scanning the new arrival. But as the door opened, the familiar face of Forge appeared. He walked over to the biker, his expression serious. We've got the information, Forge said, holding up a folder. It's all here. The biker took the folder, his heart racing as he opened it. Inside, there were details about Donovan's connections, information about the gang he was working with, and even more disturbing, names of high-ranking officials who were involved in the operation. The biker's blood ran cold as he read through the documents. This was bigger than he had imagined. They were dealing with corruption at every level. The biker looked up at Forge, his jaw clenched. We need to take them down, he said, his voice filled with determination. Now, Forge nodded. We've got a plan in motion, but we need to be careful. This is bigger than just Donovan. If we're not careful, we could bring down the whole system. The biker didn't hesitate. I don't care about the system. I care about getting justice for Maya and her family. We're doing this, and we're doing it now. With the new information in hand, the biker knew their next move was crucial. They were up against powerful enemies, and every step they took had to be calculated. The fight for Maya's safety was far from over. But one thing was clear, they were going to make sure her brother came home, and they were going to bring down those who had hurt her family. The tension was thick in the small room as the biker and his crew gathered around the table, the files Forge had brought with him spread out before them. The weight of the situation had settled over them, a realization that they were stepping into something far more dangerous than they had initially thought. They weren't just dealing with a rogue cop anymore. What they were up against now was an intricate network of power, corruption, and deceit that reached deep into the heart of the city. As the biker flipped through the pages, his jaw clenched tighter with every new piece of information. The names in the file were ones he recognized. High-ranking officials, influential businessmen, even people in the community who had always seemed untouchable. Each one had their hands in something illegal, something far darker than anything the biker had ever imagined. And now, Maya and her family were at the center of it. The biker looked up at his crew, his eyes burning with determination. This goes deeper than we thought, he said, his voice steady but filled with intensity. These people are connected in ways we can't even begin to understand. But we're going to stop them. We're going to make sure Maya and her brother are safe, no matter what it takes. His brothers nodded, their faces hardened with resolve. They were all in this together. The biker stood up, his hands slamming onto the table as he looked each one of them in the eye. Here's the plan, he said, his voice cold. We're going to hit them where it hurts. We've got enough evidence to bring them down, but we need to make sure we move fast before they have a chance to cover their tracks. Forge spoke up, his voice grave. We've got to be careful. We can't afford to tip them off. They'll be on the lookout for anything suspicious, and they'll try to silence anyone who gets in their way. The biker turned to him, his eyes hard. We're not going to give them that chance, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. We're going to hit them all at once. No mercy. They spent the next few hours planning, their strategy coming together piece by piece. Every move had to be calculated, every step taken with precision. They couldn't afford any mistakes. The biker knew that the moment they moved, there was no turning back. They were up against people who would do anything to protect themselves and their power. As they finalized their plans, the biker couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into the lion's den. But there was no other choice. Maya's family needed justice, and he wasn't going to rest until they got it. As dawn approached, the biker stood up from the table, his eyes scanning the faces of his crew. We're moving out, he said, his voice resolute. "This is it. Let's make sure they never hurt anyone again." The crew nodded, standing up and heading for their bikes. They were ready. They rode out in formation, the sound of their engines roaring into the night, the adrenaline pumping through their veins. They had one mission: take down the criminals who thought they were untouchable and bring justice to a family who had been broken by the system. The city lay ahead of them, and as the biker looked out over the horizon, he felt the weight of their task on his shoulders. But he also felt something else: hope. Hope that, even in the face of such overwhelming darkness, they could make a difference. The ride was long, the wind whipping past them as they sped toward their target. As they neared the location, the biker's heart began to race. This was it, the moment they had been preparing for. The fight for Maya's safety had led them here, to the heart of the enemy's stronghold. They had one shot at this, and they had to make it count. The biker signaled for his crew to slow down, their engines purring as they neared the building. It was a nondescript warehouse, nothing that would raise suspicion from the outside. But the biker knew better. Inside, there was a world of corruption, and they were about to tear it apart. They parked their bikes just out of sight, moving quietly toward the entrance. The biker motioned for everyone to take their positions. They had no room for error. The plan was simple: get in, get the information, and get out before anyone had a chance to react. But as the biker moved toward the door, something felt off. His instincts were on high alert. There was something wrong. They weren't as invisible as they thought. Just as the biker reached for the door, the unmistakable sound of a gunshot rang out, echoing through the quiet street. His body moved instinctively, diving to the ground, his heart pounding. "Get down," he shouted to his crew. The others quickly hit the ground, taking cover behind anything they could find. The biker's eyes scanned the area, trying to locate the shooter. His pulse raced as he realized they had been compromised. The plan had already gone wrong. He motioned for his brothers to stay low, knowing they had to act fast. "Stay sharp," he said, his voice low but urgent. "We move together. Get to the back. We'll make our way in from there." They nodded, moving with precision, their movements fluid as they made their way toward the back of the building. The biker's mind raced, trying to keep up with the chaos unfolding around them. They were in the enemy's territory now, and they had no idea how many people were waiting for them inside. But there was no turning back now. The fight for Maya's family was about to reach its breaking point. The sound of footsteps echoed through the dimly lit warehouse as the biker and his crew moved swiftly toward the back entrance. The air was thick with tension, the sudden gunshot still ringing in his ears. The biker's heart raced, adrenaline pumping through his veins as he signaled his crew to stay low. They had to move fast, but they couldn't afford to make a sound. The chaos from earlier had already tipped their hand, and they couldn't risk another mistake. His mind raced as he thought about the files Forge had handed him, names, connections, and the dark web of corruption they had stumbled into. The man who had been chasing Maya's brother was just the tip of the iceberg. The biker had a feeling that this mission was only going to get more dangerous from here on out. As they crept around the corner of the building, the biker noticed the faint glow of lights through a small window in the back. The warehouse was larger than he'd thought, and there had to be more people inside. He motioned for his crew to halt and took a slow, steady breath. They were getting close to their goal. They had no idea what they would find once they entered, but one thing was certain: they couldn't leave until they had answers. The door to the back of the warehouse was heavy and rusted, but it creaked open quietly as the biker gently turned the handle. The smell of old wood and metal filled the air as they slipped inside. The room was dimly lit, the only light coming from a single bulb hanging overhead. Shadows filled the corners, and the faint hum of machinery echoed in the distance. The biker motioned for his crew to spread out, their eyes scanning every inch of the room. They had to be ready for anything. They moved cautiously, stepping over boxes and debris that littered the floor. The sounds of their footsteps barely registered over the pounding in his chest. His eyes darted around, every muscle in his body tense, prepared for whatever came next. Then, he heard it, the sound of muffled voices coming from a doorway at the far end of the room. The biker motioned for his crew to stay put, and silently crept toward the source of the noise. He moved slowly, each step calculated, making sure not to alert anyone inside. As he neared the door, he could hear snippets of conversation. A man's voice, low and threatening. "I don't care how long it takes. We'll get what we need." No one can stop us. The biker's heart skipped a beat. The words sent a chill down his spine. They weren't just after Maya's brother. They were after something much bigger. He pushed the door open just enough to peer inside. What he saw made his blood run cold. The room was filled with people, men and women sitting around a large table, papers and laptops spread out in front of them. They were planning something, but it wasn't just about kidnapping kids. It was much more sinister than that. The biker's hand instinctively reached for his gun, but he held himself back. He needed to get more information before making a move. As he continued to watch, one of the figures at the table spoke up. "We've got the cops in our pocket," he said, a smug smile on his face. "And if anyone gets in the way, we handle them. No questions asked." The biker's blood boiled. The corruption went deeper than he had imagined. These people weren't just criminals. They were pulling strings at the highest levels. His mind raced as he thought about Maya, her family, and how they had gotten caught up in this mess. The man continued, his voice growing more animated. "Once we have the kid, we're set. The plan's already in motion." The biker's grip tightened on his gun. This was it. They had to act now before it was too late. He motioned to his crew, signaling for them to move in. The door creaked slightly as they pushed it open further, entering the room. The moment they stepped inside, the conversation stopped, and all eyes turned toward them. The biker didn't hesitate. He pulled his gun, pointing it directly at the man who had been speaking. "Nobody move," he commanded, his voice sharp and commanding. The room froze. The people at the table looked confused, unsure of how to react. The biker's crew moved quickly, surrounding the room, making sure no one could escape. The tension in the air was palpable, and the biker's mind raced. They had to make sure they got the information they needed, but they also had to be careful. One wrong move, and everything could go south. "Where is the boy?" the biker demanded, his eyes locking onto the man at the head of the table. "What are you planning to do with him?" The man looked up at him, his expression shifting from confusion to anger. "You don't know what you're getting into," he sneered. "You're just a bunch of bikers trying to play hero. You have no idea how deep this goes." The biker stepped forward, his voice cold. "I don't care how deep it goes. You're not getting away with this." The man let out a low laugh, as if mocking him. "You think you can stop us?" he said. "You're nothing compared to the people we're working with." The biker didn't flinch. "I don't need to be," he said, his voice steady. "But you're going to tell me everything. And you're going to start right now." As the man opened his mouth to speak, the biker could hear the faint sound of sirens in the distance. Time was running out. They needed answers, and they needed them fast. The biker turned to his crew, his eyes scanning the room one last time. "Move out," he ordered. "We've got what we need. Get the boy and get out of here." The crew moved quickly, taking action without hesitation. The biker's mind raced as they worked to secure the area. He knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. But for the first time since they started this mission, he felt a glimmer of hope. They were getting closer to bringing justice to Maya and her family. And they weren't going to stop until it was done. The biker stood in the middle of the dimly lit warehouse, his heart racing as his crew secured the area. The room was tense, the air thick with the weight of what had just transpired. They had the information they needed, but something gnawed at the back of his mind. There was still so much they didn't know. They had caught a glimpse of the operation, but they hadn't seen the full picture yet. Maya's brother was still out there somewhere, and the people they had just confronted were only a small part of a much larger network. The biker turned to his crew, his expression hardening as he spoke. "Get the kid," he said firmly. "We need to move fast. We don't have much time before someone comes looking for him." His crew moved quickly, their actions efficient and precise. There was no hesitation in their movements. They had been through too much together, and they knew what was at stake. The biker's mind raced as he watched them work. They were getting closer to the truth, but every step they took felt like it led them into more danger. The situation had already escalated far beyond what he had expected, and he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. As the last of his crew members moved toward the back exit, the biker's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, his eyes scanning the screen. It was a message from Forge. "We've got a lead on the main guy. He's not far from where you are. Be careful. We don't know how many of them are still inside." The biker's stomach tightened. They had already uncovered a web of corruption, but now they were being led straight into the heart of it. The man who had been calling the shots, the one who had been pulling the strings, was just a few steps away. The biker looked over at his crew, his face set with determination. "We've got a new target," he said. "Let's move." They left the warehouse quickly, their engines roaring to life as they hit the street. The night was still and quiet, the city's lights casting long shadows across the road as they sped toward their next destination. The biker's mind was focused on the mission. He couldn't afford to get distracted. Maya's brother was still in danger, and there were people out there who were willing to do anything to keep their secrets hidden. As they neared their destination, the biker's thoughts turned to Maya. He hadn't seen her in a while, but he could still picture her face, the fear in her eyes, the way she had clung to him for safety. She had been through so much, and now it was his job to make sure she never had to go through anything like that again. The biker shook his head, pushing the thought to the back of his mind. There was no time for emotions. They had a job to do, and it wasn't over yet. They pulled into a parking lot near an abandoned building, the place Forge had marked on the map. It was dark, the windows of the building boarded up, and there were no signs of life around them. The biker's gut told him something was off, but he didn't hesitate. They were close. The crew dismounted, their steps silent on the cracked pavement. The biker's hand was on his gun, ready for anything. "Stay sharp," he said, his voice low. "We're close. This is where we find out who's really behind all of this." They moved cautiously toward the entrance, the building looming in front of them like a giant, hollow shell. The biker's heart was pounding now, each step bringing them closer to the unknown. They reached the door, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the silence. The biker turned the handle slowly, pushing the door open just enough to peek inside. The room was dark, but he could make out figures moving in the shadows. He motioned for his crew to stay quiet, and they crept inside. The biker's mind was racing again. They had no idea who or what they were walking into, but they had come too far to turn back now. As they moved deeper into the building, the sounds of hushed voices reached their ears. The biker's instincts kicked in, and he signaled for them to spread out. Every step was calculated, every movement purposeful. They were ready for whatever came next. The voices grew louder, and the biker could hear a man's voice above the others. "You think you've won?" the man said, his voice dripping with contempt. "This is bigger than you could ever understand." The biker's pulse quickened. He recognized the voice. It was the man they had been chasing, the one behind all of this. The man who had been controlling everything from the shadows. The biker's hand tightened on his gun. "We're going to stop you," he muttered under his breath. "And we're going to make sure you never hurt anyone again." They reached the end of the hallway and paused. The man's voice was clearer now, but it was mixed with the sound of something else, something that made the biker's blood run cold. The sound of a child crying. It was faint, almost drowned out by the noise of the conversation, but it was there. The biker's heart stopped for a moment. "They've got him," he whispered, his voice hard. "Move now." They burst into the room, guns drawn, but the sight before them made them freeze. The man, the mastermind behind it all, stood in the center of the room, a smug smile on his face. And in front of him, a small boy, Maya's brother, was tied to a chair, his eyes wide with fear. The biker's heart clenched. They had found him. Now, they had to finish what they started. The biker's heart pounded as he saw the boy, Maya's brother, tied to the chair in front of him. The air in the room felt suffocating, and for a moment, everything seemed to freeze. The man who had been pulling the strings, the one responsible for so much pain and destruction, stood in front of him, smirking as if the game was already won. The biker's mind was racing, every second feeling like an eternity. The man's smug expression didn't falter as the biker stepped forward, his hand gripping the gun in his holster, but he didn't draw it yet. The boy, wide-eyed and terrified, looked at the biker, his small body shaking in fear. The tears in his eyes were a sharp reminder of how high the stakes were. This wasn't just a fight for justice. It was a fight to save a child who had already been through too much. The biker spoke low and steady, his voice firm but filled with urgency. "Let him go," he ordered, his eyes never leaving the man. "This is between you and me. Let the kid go." The man's smile only widened. "You think you can just walk in here and take him?" he sneered. "You've already cost me too much, and now you want to play the hero? This isn't your fight, biker. You're way out of your depth." The biker took a step forward, his grip tightening on his gun. "It is now," he said coldly. "You've made it my fight the moment you took that kid." The man's expression faltered for just a second, but it was enough for the biker to see the crack in his facade. He was losing control. The biker's voice dropped to a threatening growl. I'm going to make sure you never hurt anyone again. You're going to tell me everything, and then you're going to pay for what you've done. The man chuckled, though there was no humor in the sound. You don't even know what you're up against, he said, his voice dripping with malice. You think this is over? You think you're the hero here? There's more coming, and you're all dead. The biker's jaw clenched. I've already heard enough, he muttered, his fingers inching toward his gun. But just as he was about to draw, the sound of a door crashing open made him freeze. He turned quickly, his body tensing. Several men in tactical gear flooded into the room, their guns raised and aimed at the biker and his crew. The biker's mind raced, his first instinct to fight back, but he knew they were outnumbered. The man who had been taunting them stood back, watching the scene unfold with satisfaction. You're too late, he said, his voice dripping with triumph. I told you, you're not the heroes here. The biker's brothers moved in formation around him, guns drawn, but there was no way they could take on this many armed men. They had to think quickly. The biker's eyes darted to the boy, who was still trembling in the chair, and then back to the man in front of him. This wasn't the end. Not yet. You won't get away with this, the biker said, his voice a low growl. You're done. The man laughed again, a cruel sound that made the biker's blood boil. We'll see about that, he said. He made a hand gesture to his men, and they advanced, closing the gap between them and the biker's crew. The biker's heart raced as he prepared to fight, but just as the men moved in, something unexpected happened. The sound of motorcycles roaring to life echoed in the distance. It was faint at first, but it grew louder, closer, and then it hit. The biker's brothers looked up, their faces registering the same realization. Backup was here. Forge's voice came through the comms. We've got you covered, he said, his voice firm. Hold tight. The biker's grip tightened on his weapon. They weren't out of the woods yet, but Forge and the crew had arrived in time to turn the tide. The tactical team paused for a split second, uncertainty flashing across their faces. It was enough. The biker's crew took advantage of the opening, firing their weapons in quick succession. The sound of gunfire echoed through the room, but the biker's focus remained on the man who had been pulling the strings. He couldn't let him slip away. With one swift motion, the biker lunged forward, his hand gripping the man's collar and pulling him to the ground. The man struggled, but the biker held him firm, his gun pressed to his chest. This ends now, the biker said, his voice deadly calm. The man's eyes widened with panic, but the biker wasn't listening anymore. He was done with the games. This was it. The fight had come to an end. You're going to tell me everything, the biker continued, or I'll make sure you regret it. The man's defiance faltered as the reality of the situation set in. His hands trembled, and the biker could see the fear in his eyes now. The man was no longer in control. The biker's brothers had neutralized the rest of the threat, the remaining men either subdued or fleeing into the night. The biker stood up, dragging the man with him. You've got one chance to save yourself, the biker said. Tell me everything about your operation, and I'll make sure you get a fair trial. The man's lips trembled as he spoke, his voice hoarse. You don't know what you're getting into. They'll come for you. They won't stop. The biker narrowed his eyes. Who are they? The man hesitated, then nodded toward the corner of the room where a large safe stood. The files, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Everything you need to know is in there, but you'll never make it out alive. The biker's heart raced. They were so close. He turned to his crew, signaling them to move quickly. Get the safe open, he ordered. We need answers now. As the crew worked to crack the code and open the safe, the biker's eyes locked onto the man in front of him. He wasn't finished yet, but they were getting closer. The pieces of the puzzle were finally falling into place. And once they had the full picture, they would bring this operation down for good. The safe clicked open, and the biker's heart skipped a beat. Inside, a stack of folders and a few flash drives lay neatly arranged, each one carefully labeled. He knew that this was it, the answers they had been desperately searching for. With a quick motion, he grabbed the stack of files and passed them to Forge, who had been by his side throughout the operation. Get this to the team, the biker said, his voice steady but filled with urgency. We need to know what's inside, and we need to move fast. Forge nodded, his face grim as he took the files. As Forge walked to the corner of the room to examine the contents, the biker turned back to the man who had orchestrated everything. Donovan, his face twisted with contempt, sat against the wall, his hands still bound tightly. The biker's eyes locked onto him, his expression cold. "You've lost," the biker said, his voice low and unwavering. "You can't escape now." Donovan laughed bitterly, his eyes glinting with defiance. "You think you've won? You have no idea what you've started. You're messing with forces that you'll never be able to stop. The people I work for, they'll find you, and they'll make you wish you'd never crossed them." The biker stepped closer, his fists clenched. "I don't care who you work for," he said firmly. "You're done, and whatever happens to you from here on out, that's on you." Donovan's face darkened, and for a moment, the biker saw a flicker of fear in his eyes. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced with a cold, bitter smirk. "You think you're the hero in this story?" Donovan sneered. "You're nothing but a pawn in a game you can't even comprehend. You can't stop what's coming." The biker's jaw tightened. "I already stopped you." He motioned to his crew, who were now securing the area. "Take him outside. We'll deal with him later." As Donovan was dragged away, the biker turned to his brothers, his eyes scanning the room. They had made it this far, but the real battle was only just beginning. The biker knew that with the information they had just uncovered, they could bring down the whole operation. But it wouldn't be easy. There were people out there who would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. The biker's thoughts turned to Maya and her brother. They had come so far, and it wasn't over yet. He still had to make sure they were safe, that nothing would ever hurt them again. "Let's go," the biker said, his voice firm. "We've got a lot of work to do." The crew moved quickly, their mission clear. The biker knew they couldn't stay here for long. They had to get the files back to their safe house, analyze the data, and start putting the pieces of the puzzle together. The operation was far bigger than any of them had realized. As they rode out, the biker's mind raced. What was the full extent of the operation? Who else was involved? And how far did the corruption reach? But there was no time for questions. Not yet. They had to stay focused. They had to make sure Maya's brother was safe. And they had to make sure that those responsible paid for what they had done. The wind whipped past them as they rode down the highway, their engines roaring in unison. The sound was deafening, but it was also a reminder of how much they had already fought for. They were a team, and they weren't stopping until the job was done. As they approached the safe house, the biker's phone buzzed again. It was Forge. "I've got the data," Forge said, his voice crackling through the speaker. "This goes deeper than we thought. There's a list of names here. High-profile politicians, law enforcement, and businessmen. This is a well-oiled machine. We've only scratched the surface." The biker's heart sank. He had feared as much. The operation they were dealing with wasn't just a local gang. It was a network of power that reached into every corner of the city, perhaps even beyond. "We need to act fast," the biker said, his voice tight with determination. "We can't let them regroup. Get everything ready, Forge. We're taking them down, no matter what." The crew made their way into the safe house, where they began reviewing the information. The biker's mind was focused on the task at hand, but part of him couldn't help but think of Maya. He had promised her father that he would protect her, and he was going to keep that promise, no matter how deep the corruption went. As the hours passed, the biker and his crew worked tirelessly, piecing together the puzzle that had been months, if not years, in the making. The names on the list, the connections between them, it was all starting to make sense. They were close. They had the evidence. They had the plan. But the biker knew that they had to be careful. They couldn't let their guard down. The people behind this were dangerous, and they wouldn't go down without a fight. "We're almost there," the biker said, looking at his crew. "We've got the information. Now it's time to make sure they never hurt anyone again." With that, they began making their final preparations, ready to take the fight to the people who had caused so much pain and suffering. The biker knew it was going to be a long road ahead, but they were ready. The battle was far from over, but they were prepared for whatever came next. The biker stood in front of the warehouse, his crew surrounding him, the hum of their engines a constant reminder of the battle they had just fought, and the battle still ahead. The information they had gathered was crucial, but the true fight was about to begin. They had taken down the immediate threat, but the network of corruption was far-reaching, its roots tangled deep within. The city's power structure. The biker clenched his fists, his mind focused. He had promised Maya's father that he would protect her, and now, with the evidence in their hands, he was ready to bring the whole operation down. "Let's move," he said, his voice steady but filled with resolve. "We've got work to do." They had spent hours preparing for this moment, piecing together the plan. Forge had managed to get them the names of the high-profile people involved, and now it was time to take action. The biker and his crew rode out, the engines of their motorcycles roaring as they sped toward their destination. The city's streets were familiar, but tonight, they felt different, charged with the weight of everything they had uncovered. The biker's mind was sharp, focused on one goal: dismantle the operation and ensure that those responsible for hurting Maya's family were brought to justice. As they neared their target, the biker couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He glanced around, his instincts telling him that they weren't alone. "Keep your eyes open," he said, his voice low but urgent. "This isn't over." They arrived at a nondescript building on the edge of town, one of the locations where their investigation had led them. It was a secure facility, its purpose unclear, but the biker knew it was linked to the people behind the corruption. He signaled for his crew to spread out, each of them taking a position. The biker moved toward the entrance, his heart pounding as he approached the door. The stakes were high, but he couldn't back down. Not now. As the door opened, the air inside was stale, heavy with the scent of secrecy and power. The biker and his crew stepped inside, their boots echoing on the concrete floor. The room was filled with equipment, computers, and files scattered across desks. But the most important thing was what they had come for: the files that could bring down the entire operation. "Find everything," the biker ordered, his voice low but firm. His brothers went to work immediately, searching through the papers, the computers, and anything else that might contain information. The biker moved to the back of the room, his eyes scanning the shelves of files. As he rifled through the documents, he came across a folder marked with a symbol he recognized, a symbol that had appeared throughout their investigation. This was it. This was the link that could connect everything. He opened the folder, his heart racing as he scanned the pages. Inside, there were documents detailing the names of more people involved, high-ranking officials, business tycoons, and even more politicians. The extent of the corruption was beyond anything he had imagined. But there was more. In the back of the folder, there was a map of the city with locations marked in red. These were the places that the operation had its hands in, from the underground network to the highest levels of government. The biker's pulse quickened as he realized the full scope of what they were dealing with. They weren't just fighting a criminal organization. They were fighting a system that had been built on lies, manipulation, and violence. "We've got what we need," the biker said, turning to his crew. "Let's go." But just as they were about to leave, the sound of sirens pierced the air. The biker's heart skipped a beat as he turned toward the door. They had been discovered. They had to move, and they had to move fast. "Get to the bikes," the biker shouted. "We're out of here." They rushed toward the exit, but before they could make it outside, the door slammed open, and armed men flooded in, blocking their path. The biker's hand went to his gun, but he knew they were outnumbered. There was no way they could take on this many armed men without risking everything. "You're too late," one of the men said, a smirk on his face. "We've been expecting you." The biker's mind raced. They had come this far, and now they were cornered. But he wasn't going down without a fight. "I don't think so," the biker said, his voice steady despite the danger. "We've got what we need, and we're leaving with it." The men raised their weapons, ready to strike, but the biker didn't hesitate. He gave a signal, and his crew immediately moved into position. They weren't about to let anyone stop them now. The air was thick with tension as the biker and his crew prepared for what would be their final stand. But just as the first shot was fired, a loud crash rang out from behind them. The doors to the warehouse flew open, and a new wave of bikers stormed in, their motorcycles revving as they charged into the room. The enemy men faltered, taken off guard by the sudden backup. "Now!" the biker shouted. The battle erupted in an instant. Gunshots, the roar of engines, and the clash of fists filled the air. The biker and his crew fought with everything they had, pushing forward, never stopping. They had one goal: take down the operation and make sure no one else would be hurt. The fight raged on, but the biker knew one thing for certain: they were winning. The operation that had held the city in its grip for so long was finally crumbling. And with every strike they landed, they were one step closer to bringing justice to Maya's family. After what felt like hours, the last of the enemy fighters had been taken down, and the warehouse was silent once more. The biker stood, breathing heavily, his heart still racing from the fight. He turned to his crew, a grim smile on his face. "We did it," he said. "It's over." They had done it. They had brought down the corrupt operation, and they had protected Maya's family. The battle was won, but the war against corruption was far from over. And the biker knew they would keep fighting. For as long as it took, they would never stop protecting those who couldn't protect themselves.